And I just thought if we had some more people that are joining us, the check-in is down in the lower left-hand corner. And there we go. We'll turn it over to Aaron.
Hi, good afternoon. I just wanted to clarify a couple of things. I sent out an email shortly before our meeting today, and it was the email I'd referenced last week that I'd hoped to have to you by Friday. Unfortunately, I didn't have it available on Friday. It was not yet through the review process, and so I wasn't able to get that to you, and I apologize for that. The email that I sent here just a little bit ago was the email that I'd hoped to send on Friday. So if you had been waiting on that, I apologize, but it has been sent to all of you. If you haven't received it, just wanted to make you aware. So what I wanted to bring up is the FY18, kind of the state of affairs with the performance reporting. And I explained some of this in the email, but I'll just kind of go over and clarify with you what I was saying there in the email. But the Uniform Grant Agreement, which is another name for what many of you are familiar with calling your contract, your grant contract, it's got a term as the Uniform Grant Agreement, and it requires periodic performance and financial reporting. And it's got to actually, the uniform guidance that we have has some pretty specific periodic performance and financial reporting requirements. And so the organization within the state that's kind of responsible for coordinating all of the GATA activities is the Governor's Office of Management and Budget, GOMBI. And GOMBI is responsible for promulgating the GATA regulations for all state grant-making agencies. And so GOMBI has actually, they have produced a report template, and I've got that template up on my screen. Natasha, am I sharing this correctly here? Have you got
You are. Yep.
Okay, the State of Illinois Periodic Performance Report there. So the Periodic Performance Report form, this is like I say, a prescribed form from GOMBI, and DHS has, for the most part, adopted this form. DHS has told our grant programs, including the Youth Employment Program, that we may use a substitute form, but if we do, it basically still has to contain all of the information that's on this state-prescribed periodic performance report. And I wanted to kind of show you this report form, and then I'll show you the form that I sent, which basically just follows this report form as closely as I can in a way that's convenient for you. So the top of the report form here just requires information here. You'll see you've got the grantee name, and it says per UGA. What that means is whatever the organizational name is that's in your uniform grant agreement, your contract, that's the name that you should put here. The grant number similarly is going to be on your uniform grant agreement, so you'll see that. It's got your organization's DUNS number and your FEIN. I've gone ahead on the form that I sent, you'll see in a minute, I've got the CSFA number in there for you and some of this data. Anything that I could fill out for you to save you time, I've gone ahead and done that. But it's got the required method of reporting and the frequency and all of that. This is just general information up here about the grant and about your organization. Then the questions below here basically deal with two things, deliverables and performance measures. And the deliverables and the performance measures come out of the Uniform Grant Agreement. So we have a long list of deliverables. Deliverables are things they're specific things that we expect you to do as part of the grant, and the performance measures are really similar. Performance measures your actual performance in terms of outcomes that we're looking for within the grant. And we've got a section of performance measures. In your Uniform Grant Agreement, the performance measures are listed in Exhibit E. And, excuse me, I'm sorry, they're listed in Exhibit E, and the standards then are listed in Exhibit F. And let me pull that up really quickly here if I can. So here is Exhibit E of one of the grant agreements here, and you can see there are 24 performance measures that we've got listed here. And so, for example, performance measure 1 is proposed versus actual enrolled youth. So all of you in your uniform grant applications at the beginning of FY18, you know, we had a notice of funding opportunity, and it was a competitive process. And in that competitive process, all of our grant organizations proposed to serve a certain number of youth. And so our question is, you know, our first performance measure is, did you actually enroll that many youth that you said you were going to, or did you not? Or did you enroll more than that? And so this is the measure. Well, then when we look at, this is Exhibit E of your grant agreement, when we look at Exhibit F of the grant agreement, Exhibit F are the performance standards. And the standards tell us what would be an acceptable level of performance for that measure. And so, for example, you can see in Exhibit F, the standards say that acceptable performance is 90%. The goal for all of these is 100%, right? The goal is always that we want you to do everything to the best of your abilities to complete it 100%. However, we recognize that some things it's not likely that you're going to be able to complete those to 100%. So we always want you to get to 100%, but we establish some lower acceptable levels. So in this case, we've got 90% for some of these, 80%. We've got one that's down to 65%. So it just depends on the performance measure and standard. And if you're ever curious, one, you can ask, or I can always supply you a copy of Exhibit C and F from your Uniform Grant Agreement, or you could just pull out your Uniform Grant Agreement and take a look at it because it's in there. And so these are the performance measures that you are committing to hit when you sign the Uniform Grant Agreement. And so that's what we are required to measure there by this periodic performance report. And one of the things that you can see here, there are these words in red. It says sections 14 through 22 may be provided in a separate format. And so what I intend to do in FY19, it's actually what I intended to do in FY18, but it's just not been able to happen yet. But in FY19, what we will do is we'll have you fill out a report form like this that you'll submit to us, and you'll put all this information here in the top. But then for these sections down below, sections 14 through 22, instead of submitting those in the PDF template here like what we've got, what we will do is we will allow you to substitute the periodic performance report that's generated from the Illinois workNet. And in fact, it won't even be that we will allow you to substitute. We are going to require that. In FY18, I realized that we've kind of been building these tools as we go along, and so if there were tools that you needed to be able to put in information for FY18 and it wasn't possible that you could get that information in there, then I realized that the FY18 periodic performance report data that comes from the Illinois workNet may not be completely accurate. And so I didn't want to rely solely on that for FY18. So for FY18, the form that I've got, I'll show you in just a moment, that follows this, I've gone ahead and put in the performance measures for you with spaces for you to elaborate on your results and what's happened there. So for FY19, though, moving forward, just to be crystal clear on this, if you have not been in the habit of making sure that the data in the workNet is accurate, you'll definitely want to start doing that moving forward, because for future reports, the mantra is going to be that if it's not in the workNet, it will be as if it didn't happen. So we don't want you to miss out on performance data that you could capture on the Illinois workNet. So to those of you who are on the call today, you've probably been those that have been faithful to be on the call on a regular basis, and you're probably doing your best to make sure that the information in the workNet is accurate to begin with. But just to reiterate, we're kind of giving you a little bit of flexibility on that this year on FY18 over the previous year, just because the system wasn't at 100% to be able to do what we wanted it to be able to do. But I believe that we are pretty much there now, and so for FY19, that will be the expectation moving forward. So you can see there on the standard report template, there's the opportunity there for the deliverables and the performance measures to be reported on. And then down here in section 22 here, you've got the option here. It says all performance accomplishments are on schedule within the performance standards, etc. And then 23 says that this is really important. This is a requirement of GATA. It says basically you have the option to check here that either your performance is consistent with grant-to-date expected services or it's not. And if it's not, there's an opportunity for an explanation here. Okay, and then finally the certification statement down here at the end. So this is, again, the standard report that's prescribed. It's kind of, it's not a bad report to fill in, but it doesn't always fit real well for the Youth Employment Program performance measures. So what I did, if I can pull this up, I have created basically, now this is my, it's kind of like a facsimile of the standard report. It's a report that I've created with fields for you to fill in, and you'll see it's very similar to the standard report. It's got the name and grant number, the DUNS number, and the FEIN, and then the prepared date. And again, I've already got filled in the CSFA number. I've got the program name, the grantor, the agreement period, etc. I've got all of that in there. When we move on to deliverables, what we did with deliverables was to just leave a large narrative section and to give you the opportunity to explain. For example, some deliverables, you know, you might think in a program, like let's say it was a construction grant or something, and we would say, hey, by this date we want to see the foundation poured, and by this date we want to see the walls up, and by this date we want to see the roof on, and then on this date you're going to have it completed, right? Our deliverables in the CYEP program are not structured really that way. And so when we look at the deliverables, it's just like, you know, you're going to operate a youth employment program, and you're going to turn in required reports, and you're going to do the things that are just required of the grant. But we don't have necessarily specific time frames for all of those deliverables that we're going to have done. So what we did instead, so we just gave you a large narrative section here to report on the program deliverables. And we ask you to please provide a narrative summary of the activities of your program during this reporting period. The narrative should identify and explain how the goals, objectives, and program deliverables as described in the application plan or uniform grant agreement were completed, I should say, during this reporting period. So at this narrative, you know, we've given you space to go ahead and type in your response here. If you find that this narrative space is not enough for you, that's okay. Anything dealing with a narrative here, if you want to attach a separate Microsoft Word document or a separate sheet to this report form, you're welcome to do that and send it in. I don't want anybody to say, hey, I can't report here because I don't have enough space. You can always add more space and send a separate narrative if you would like to. You might just put in your narrative, you know, see attached deliverables narrative, and then you could just attach that sheet to this report, okay? Then regarding the next section, which deals with the performance measures, what I have a number of questions here that you'll answer, and what that will do, these numbers will then form the basis for a lot of the performance measures. So for example, it says, the first one says, indicate the total number of proposed CYEP enrollments for FY18. So let's say in FY18 your proposal was a proposal for 50 enrollments. And next question says, indicate the total number of proposed CYEP job placements for FY18. So let's say of those 50, you planned to put 48 of them to work. You know, and you thought maybe there might be a couple that ultimately don't get work, but ideally all of them, again, would get work, but if your proposal was for 48, then that's what it was. It says indicate the total number of actual initial subsidized job placements. So this is just on an individual basis, how many kids were put to work in at least one job. And so let's say that, and when we say initial subsidized, these are job placements that started as subsidized jobs. And so if you started them out in a subsidized job, it may later have converted to an unsubsidized job, but if it started as a subsidized job, we'll go ahead and list that here. So indicate the total number of initial subsidized job placements. Maybe you had 30 subsidized job placements initially, and you ended up with 20 unsubsidized job placements initially. Then we say indicate the number of Family and Community Resource Center referrals you got. So maybe you got 12 referrals from the FCRCs. Maybe of those 12, only 10 of them were eligible because maybe a couple of them weren't eligible because maybe they didn't live in the state of Illinois, or they weren't legally authorized to work in the state of Illinois, or they didn't meet one of the age requirements or one of the other eligibility criteria. This says, the next one says, indicate the total number of youth assessed as requiring supportive services. So in other words, you're supposed to assess all of the youth participants in your program to find out if they need supportive services. So let's say you assessed, all of the youth, and of the youth that you assessed, 36 of them needed supportive services. The next question says, indicate the total number of youth without a high school diploma or equivalent at the time of enrollment. Say you got 15, and then indicate the total number of youth who have completed the program and whose cases have been closed. So when we talk about case closure, I know this is something Natasha's talked about with the workNet, but basically these are people who are done. They're totally finished up with the CYEP program, and if you've got any that you've got their cases closed, you would just mark that. So maybe you were only able to completely close 8 cases during the course of the year, which isn't a bad number necessarily, because some of the cases, again, it would not be unusual that they roll over into FY19. So once you get these numbers filled in, these numbers again form the basis of the questions. And what you'll see here, each performance measure is numbered on the screen, and you'll see on each page there will be about 3 performance measures that we're able to fit on the page, and they're numbered here. Again, this is number 3, 4, and 5, and it'll go through, and there'll just be several pages of these that get all the way through the 24 performance measures. And while it looks like a lot, I promise you it's really not. It's actually fairly straightforward here. So, for example, performance measure number 1 here says, indicate the total number of CYP enrollments during this reporting period. So you can see this is performance measure 1, which is proposed versus actual enrollment. The performance measure is listed here. The performance standard then gives the minimum standard. So the acceptable performance, in other words, is that 90% of the proposed youth will be enrolled. And you can see here under the results accomplished section, we've got the result and whether or not the standard is met. And I want to show you how this works. It's quite simple and straightforward. So if you indicate that you enrolled, let's say 45 people, okay, you can see, I don't know, Natasha, can you see this clear enough? Do I need to increase the size here?
No, you're good. You're good.
Okay. You'll see if we put 45 people, it will automatically calculate a result of 90%, and it will indicate that the standard has been met. And you can see the standard here on the left, that the standard is 90% of proposed youth will be enrolled. If you've got 45 that you enrolled and you proposed to enroll 50, what it's doing here, this is why I've asked these numbers up above, what it's doing is comparing this number to this number. And it's saying 45 out of 90, or 45 out of 50 is 90%. And then it's calculating that that standard has been met. If you only enrolled 40 youth, 40 out of 50 would be 80%, and it will automatically calculate that number, and then it will indicate that the standard was not met. So it's pretty straightforward. For each measure, you basically are going to enter one number. You're going to answer this question here in the white box at the top, and the answer to that question will tell us what the results were and whether or not the standard was met. If the standard was met, there's no further explanation that's needed. You would just go on to the next question. If, in this case, the standard was not met, and we have a no here, you might explain why the answer is no. You will need to use this little narrative here where it says, if the performance measure or standard is not on track or has not been met during this reporting period, please provide an explanation. So you might provide an explanation that, we didn't have the same number of referrals that we were expecting to, or whatever the reason is, you'll give the reason there. So you just report the number and go on. And it'll be the same way across the board. You won't actually ever have to fill in the result or standard met because it will calculate that for you automatically. Okay? The only thing you'll have to do is on each number here, this white number at the top here, this white performance measure number, you'll just click on the box and you'll enter the number, and it will compare it against some of the things that you've already reported here. So again, indicate the number of actual CYP job placements. You had proposed you were going to get 48. You end up with 48, so you've got 100%, and you've met your performance. If you only did 38, you're only at 79%, and you did not meet the performance standard. So hopefully you see how this works. It's fairly simple and straightforward here. Let me highlight, most of these are going to be straightforward. I won't take you through every single measure, but I'll take you through a couple that just in case so you know where the numbers come from. But number 3 says indicate the number of youth enrolled during the reporting period that met the eligibility requirements. And again, you'll see the standard is that 100% of enrolled youth meet the eligibility requirement. We shouldn't have youth that are enrolled in the CYP program that aren't eligible. So ideally, it should be there. Also, you're going to have to kind of check some numbers here. If you've, let me show you here as this goes. So your proposed enrollments that you proposed were 50, but you actually only enrolled 40 youth, right? So this number that you put in here shows that you enrolled 40 youth during this period. Well, if you go down to number 3 and you put in 40, it's showing that 100% of the youth were eligible. In other words, this is not based on what you proposed. This is based on the actual number of youth that you enrolled. So what you put in for number 1, the actual number of CYP enrollments during this period, forms the basis of the calculation in number 3. So sometimes one performance measure will be based on what you reported in a previous performance measure. Okay, so for example, and if you said 39 of 40, like you got 97% were eligible, but that still didn't meet the standard because the standard was 100% of all the enrolled youth would be eligible. You should not have a number like this. You shouldn't have 46 were found to be eligible. And you can see that'd be 115% were found to be eligible. Well, when you're talking about actual enrollments, you just told me that you only enrolled 40 people in the program during this year, and here you said that 46 of them were eligible. Well, you shouldn't have 46 eligible participants. So you'll kind of have to take a look to make sure your numbers make sense. Sometimes you might get over 100%, but not when you're talking about actuals. So for example, when you were talking about proposed versus actual, so for example, this says indicate the total number of CYP enrollments that you had during the year. Maybe you enrolled 60 people during the year. And you can see here your number is 120%, and that's because you only proposed to serve 50. Well, you can exceed what you proposed, right? So in this particular case, 120% is perfectly reasonable. However, again, when you're talking about how many of those youth were found to be eligible, it shouldn't be more than your total number of youth that you enrolled. So you kind of have to look at these numbers and make sure they make sense to you. I'm going to go on here. A couple of these are not so bad here. This one says indicate the total number of enrolled youth that completed the NOCD 21st Century Skills Assessment. So if we put in, that 50 people took the skills assessment, this shows that 83% of our total enrolled youth took the skills assessment, which meets the standard. Then when you come down here, the next question says, how many earned the NOCD Work Readiness Certificate? What this is going to be based on is this question up here. So you'll see as you go that the various measures sometimes will be based on previous measures, okay? So I just wanted to clarify that with you and make sure this makes sense to you. So I won't go through every single one, but I wanted to give you kind of some examples of how these numbers are calculating and where they're pulling from. And then ultimately, once you get done with all of the performance measures, there's performance measure number 24 there. It just asks, how many job vacancies did you share with the local SCRC? As long as you shared at least one or more job vacancies, you will meet the performance standard there. So then there's the section 4, which comes again from the standard template, which says, are performance accomplishments correlated to reported expenditures? And so what I've asked you to do here is to put your total reported expenditures for FY18, and you'll mark here. So let's say your reported expenditures, you'll look at your June EDF that you submitted, and it'll have your total cumulative year-to-date reported expenditures. You might put in $165,000 that you've spent, and then the question is that consistent with your grant-to-date expected services or not? Is the performance that you just reported in the previous section consistent with spending that amount of money? And it, like I say, it either is or it isn't, and it's kind of a subjective determination. It'll be up to you to tell me whether it is or is not, but you'll go ahead and check either box, check one or the other. If you check that it's not consistent, you'll go ahead and report down here in an explanation why it's not consistent. So, hey, I'm getting some background noise too, so if you have not muted your phone, if you can please do that. And then finally, the last section here is just the grantee certification statement here, and so this just this is the certification statement that's required in 2 CFR 200 in the Uniform Grant guidance there. And so you'll go ahead and whoever's submitting this will go ahead and put this information in here. You can type your name and title. So if you, I've got two lines here. I've got a line to type the name and title, and then I've also got a signature line. So you could type your name, this is Aaron Hacker. You could just say Program Administrator or whatever your title is, and then you can click the signature line, and this will allow you to put in an Adobe digital signature. If you've got an Adobe digital signature, you can sign it electronically, and it'll apply that signature, and then you can put in the phone and email address. This is for, of course, state agency use only here at the bottom, but so the certification statement is just like that. Once you do all of that information, you get the digital signature on there. You'll just save a copy of it and send it directly to the email address that I put in the email message that I sent this form to you. You'll put it in or send it to dhs.youthservicesinfo@illinois.gov, and should be able to go from there, okay? So if you have any questions or concerns about the form, or if you think something's odd about it, let me know. I believe everything's calculating correctly, but if something is not, just let me know, and we'll make sure we get it to you. Again, this is for FY18. I will send you a new form for FY19. It will look very similar to this, but again, in FY19, it will not have all of this Section 3 performance measure stuff here, because all of that will be attached to the report, and it will come from the Illinois workNet, okay? So, but the format will roughly be similar moving forward, okay, with just the fact that we're going to take the data from the workNet. So I'm going to go ahead and close out, and I will turn it over to Natasha, but I just wanted you to be aware of what I've recently sent and kind of why I've sent this form and how it relates to what we've been talking about and doing here at the workNet. The goal is to be in compliance. The goal is to have accurate data and that accurately reflects the work that we've been doing, and we are getting there. And I'm pretty excited at what we've we've got put together with the workNet, but I know it's been a long process as we've developed one tool after another to be able to capture all the information. So Natasha, I guess with that, it is all yours.
Okay, great, thanks. Let me go ahead and share my screen. If you've joined us a little bit later and you haven't already checked in, go ahead and do so. It's in the lower left-hand corner. And the past couple of webinars we've spent quite a bit of time going over the periodic performance report. And so if you have any questions on that, please let me know, and we can help you with figuring out whatever we need to do to either move people into the right places within that report or make any updates or corrections or whatever is needed. So if you have anything related specifically to that, go ahead and put it in the chat. We will be making some more updates to the periodic performance report. We met with Aaron just the other day, and we're going to add some more instructions and build that into, let me just go into this area and just show you the report. You'll see this little icon up here that says reports. You can click on that. You'll see CYEP reporting. And just so you know, we're going to add in a little instruction link that opens up a window, a little modal window, and it kind of gives you the highlights of the steps that need to be completed and where the data is coming from, so you know where exactly the information needs to be updated to make sure that your people are falling in the right areas in the periodic performance report. And then it'll also have the links to the more detailed instructions as well. So we'll get working on that here very soon. So you can expect to see those updates. The other update that we had, this is on test. It hasn't been released to production yet, but I wanted to give you a preview so that if I could release it before our next webinar, then I can go ahead and do that, and you'll have already had a preview of it. And then if you had any questions, we could talk about it next week. As part of, this is related specifically to the ISTEP, and we've kind of gone over this several times, so I don't want to go into it too deeply, but the idea is it's a process. So first of all, you view the assessment results, put together an assessment summary narrative. Based on that, you're going to set goals. The goals are going to be set. You can put your goal statement, identify an area, category. Is it long-term, short-term? Has it not started, on track, off track, or complete? So you're going to identify those goals, and you're going to add services to each of those goals. So once you have your goal, you can either click Add Service, Add, or you can view them, or you can go to Step 3. Go to the same place. At the top, you'll have a list of system-generated recommendations, just because these are all identified as items that would be in CYEP. Now, they might look a little bit different too, because this is on test, and we did, just put in random text in some of these. So you can add multiple services. There's basically two types of layouts for filling in the information. Is we have permanent employment. Click on the Edit button, and that's going to have you select an employer work site, and it's going to populate fields automatically. you're going to populate the other fields. These are the exact same fields that are in worksite placement, but we prefer that you use this area, the ISTEP, to record and keep track of those services and the status for each of those services, such as the 30-day follow-up, 60, 90, 180, 270-day follow-up. If you could do that within the ISTEP, that way it not only updates your records in worksite placement and throughout Illinois WorkNet, but it also updates the ISTEP so that the customer can view those that information. So if we go back to that one kind of format, and you don't have to pick a format, you just have to pick what type of step or service it is, and it'll automatically default to the layout for that particular step. The other one, let's say, is explore jobs, and I skipped this on the other step, but all these are going to be associated with a goal. Put your start date, due date, status, weekly hours, not WIOA funded for this project, special instructions, identify barriers. Those are basics for each of the services. Now, why do I say all this? Is because those are the basic steps for creating the ISTEP, the Individualized Services Training and Employment Plan. And your customer is going to have a view of this plan. So you have a couple options, because really the service plan should have an area where the customer says, yes, I agree that we did this together, we talked about this, these goals were, I am in agreement with the goals, and I'm committed to completing the plan. There's a couple different ways that you can have this on record. One of the ways that we have been working through that is not available yet on production, but I'm showing it to you on test, is that you can send an electronic request for the customer to sign it, and that'll just be saved that they agreed to the plan. You can indicate that you have this customer agreement uploaded or on file, or you can indicate that I'm unable to get the customer agreement on file at this time. So I'm going to send the electronic request to my customer. Okay, so it says my status is I sent the request for customer agreement. Now I'm going to show you what it looks like from the customer's perspective. They're going to default to this plan, goals, and steps, which are the ideas or areas that you created in the other view. So you can see their goal. You can see the related steps that are next to each of those areas. And then some related resources, related information for each of those steps in here. Okay? So the customer can see all of the goals and related steps information that you had put into the system. So what they're being asked to do is it says latest status, your career planner has sent an electronic request to agree to your updated ISTEP. And so it says respond. So they're going to get a mobile window. It says, I agree to the current goals and plans. I've reviewed the goal steps, start and end dates and status. I agree that I participated in development of my individualized services training and employment plan. I'm committed to following this plan and completing all the steps listed in the plan. They can either say that, or they could say, I do not agree to the goals of the plan. So I reviewed all this stuff, and I would like a career advisor to contact me so that we can talk about changes that need to be made to the plan. Now, if they select this, that I do not agree, then the person who submitted the request will get a notification that says, please contact, Tasha CYEP. They would like to review their ISTEP and make updates. So then they can save their information, and that status will be saved with their with this line item for their agreement. If they want to, they also have access to some other information like their skills and interests and experiences. This is essentially the assessment area that they have access to, but it has access to a little bit more information. It pulls in the information that also comes in from their application. They can also see their list of accomplishments. They can see what goals have been completed, credentials, services have been completed. The idea here is that on this overview page, they're starting to build up their listing, the skills, credentials, and so forth, and so that they need to make sure they're keeping their resume updated. So what we wanted to do was bring in the resume builder, easy access, bring the tools to them when they need it, when they're being recommended to be used. And so we have the resume builder here where they can click on the guide, which is a guide on how to develop your resume. And then we also have the link to the actual resume builder. The next area that we have is the job lead section. And so we have links to the different tools that we have for finding job links, job. Test here. Let me just go and find this. You can see what it looks like. These are the different tools that we have in workNet that they can use to help them find job openings. Plus, they can say bookmarks to job openings, and those will have them listed here. And then in production, you'll have the list of articles. Those need to be added, but we'll have the list of articles that are related to finding jobs. So the idea is that we wanted to provide a view that gives your customer the visibility, transparency of what their plan is, organized by goals and steps. So this, again, this is their default view. But then we also give them access to like their background information, their accomplishments, job leads, and then they can download this information to be printed as well. So, this agreement piece isn't out there yet, but it will be in the near future. But did you have any questions so far? We'll go over this again when it's out in production, but I wanted to give you a heads up in case I'm able to push it out to production prior to our next webinar. Okay, everyone's really quiet today, but that is fine. Is there anything else you wanted to cover, or Aaron?
I think we're in good shape. If nobody has any questions, again, if you come up with questions later about the performance measures on the report that I sent out or anything else, let me know. As far as FY19 expenditure documentation forms with the budgets pre-filled, those will be sent shortly. Those won't be due. Of course, your first expenditure documentation form won't be due until August 15th. And again, I know we've had this discussion before, but I just want to be really clear on this too, that the first payment that you receive for FY19 should be approximately 3/12 or 1/4 of your grant award. You should get a payment up front. You will still need to report the expenditures on a monthly basis and report them timely, so it'll be important to do that. But also, if you haven't submitted your FY18 expenditure documentation form for June, we need to do that right away. Whereas some months it's not a huge problem if things are delayed a little bit. If any reports are submitted after July 15th, which we're already after July 15th, we cannot guarantee payment for those expenditure reports. So we still believe that we can get you payment, we just can't guarantee it, and our ability to get those paid decreases as time goes on. So if you haven't submitted those for your June payment, be sure that you do that. I think we've gotten most of them but just in case there's somebody on the call today that knows they haven't, be sure to get those submitted. Otherwise, have a good afternoon, and if you haven't checked on the poll, if you can put the poll back up, Natasha, we'll let you check out there to make sure we account for who's here. Thanks. Goodbye.